Hello and welcome back to another episode of Diving Deep with the Levs here on What's the Biz 559.
Yeah.
We are so excited to have you here with us. Today we're going to be talking a little bit more and continuing our series on communication.
Yes.
Now, our last few episodes we touched on the different listening types, and today we're going to talk about the different communication styles. And a lot of times we hear that communication is key, especially when it comes to having a healthy marriage. What's the one thing that you need? That was your part. You should say communication.
Communication.
We didn't practice this. Okay.
Right?
Communication. But people tell you all the time that communication is key. What I feel we lack is what are those keys to healthy communication and how can we actually walk that out in a marriage? And so today we want to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, because we talk about communication quite a bit. We have talked about it quite a bit throughout our time here on the podcast in one way or the other. But one thing we haven't talked about was just the different styles, because an important piece of being able to communicate effectively is knowing how you communicate.
Correct.
And so we're going to dive deep into that. I guess I'll just kick us off by just asking you, what are some of the communication styles?
Okay, so one of them is assertive. When I think of a communicator that is assertive, they know how to express their opinions, their thoughts, their feelings in a way that's healthy, but also respectful. Mm-hmm. They don't leave you guessing. They know how to be clear on the boundaries that they set in expressing that as well. I think that's equally as important. That is a communicator that is assertive. And so that's one of the communication styles. Do you want to add to that? When you think of assertive, what comes to mind?
I think of somebody who knows their boundaries, mm-hmm. somebody who knows what they like, what they don't like, somebody who knows how they like to be talked to, what mm-hmm. triggers them, and there's a self-awareness about them in a sense. I think that's all I would add to assertive.
Okay.
What other ones you got?
Passive,
okay.
When you think of a passive communicator, what comes to mind?
I don't like how you looked at me and asked that.
You're not passive, honey.
I don't know, but the way you looked at me kind of alluded to that.
No, you're not a passive communicator.
But no, so when I think of passive, I think of someone who, even let's just kind of, I think it'll be easy for our viewers if we kind of use the illustration of boundaries, how somebody will say this is where I draw the line in the sand. So let's just kind of stick with that.
Okay.
So someone who's assertive would draw the line in the sand and they would say, okay, this is my side, this is your side. Mm-hmm. Once you cross this, I'm going to say something about it and we're going to do something about it. Right. Somebody who is passive is someone who draws the line and allows the other person to cross into their boundary, cross into their space, and even if it affects them and makes them feel a type of way, they don't necessarily say something about it. They just say, I guess this is how it's supposed to be.
Yeah, I agree because they are avoiding conflict. So it's okay, I drew this line and I let you know what that expectation is. But if you cross that line, I'm not going to address it because I want to keep the peace, essentially.
Yeah. Okay. So that makes a good point. So somebody who's passive, they'll do whatever it takes to keep their inner peace. Mm-hmm. And that's more so just keeping it within, not getting it out, not having the conversation.
Right.
And just allowing what happens to them to just simply happen. I see on your notes that you have a communication style as passive aggressive. Mm-hmm. So explain what is passive aggressive and how does that differ from passive?
I feel like in order to go over passive aggressive, we have to talk about the aggressive communication style first, because passive aggressive would include both of those.
Okay, explain. Start with aggression.
Okay.
Or aggressive.
Okay.
And then how does that connect? How does passive aggressive bridge those two? So what's aggressive?
When I think of someone that's aggressive, I feel like they're more direct, they're straightforward, unfiltered, and I feel like it's more hostile in their communication style. Like they have no
Okay.
problems saying how they feel and expressing that to you. And sometimes that could include over talking, you not being able to get a point in, being very passionate in what they're saying. And there's nothing wrong with that. I don't think that passion necessarily is aggressive, but for me, that's what comes to mind when I think of aggressive.
Okay. So explain the difference between passive aggressive and aggressive.
If someone is passive aggressive, then they have a little bit of both. They have that a little bit of being passive to where they won't speak and they won't share, but they have the aggressiveness in terms of they'll do it in a way that's sarcastic or in a joke or like a backhanded compliment. And you know how you've actually told me this? You say that there's a little bit of truth to every joke. A wise man once told me.
Okay.
There's a little bit of truth to every joke. So it could be saying something jokingly that's harsh that you really mean, but you say it in a joking manner because you don't want to just boldly,
Okay.
head on just say how you're really feeling.
Okay. So what you're saying is when you're passive aggressive, there's a way of stating your needs that isn't direct. Like you basically indirectly say like, hey, for example, like if we're talking and I say, hey, can you pay me more attention?
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think of the example. It was a situation that we had.
What was it? Remind me.
I don't know. But anyway, so basically you're saying like when it comes to passive aggression, you're explaining your needs in a way that's not direct.
Yeah.
And basically what it shows is a frustration with how you've been treated. And it's hard for you to directly address the person because you don't like conflict. And so you're trying to go about it in a way to kind of like blow off steam in a sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Exactly.
So why are we talking about communication styles? Why are we sharing this? What's your take on it?
My take is if you are able to identify what your communication style is as well as know what your partner's is, then in communicating and helping to strengthen that communication, it will help you. So let's say that you're aggressive and that I'm passive. And in knowing our communication styles, you would have to tone it down a bit, come down a notch, but you would also have to maybe ask questions because I'm passive and I'm not going to openly just state and express whatever my needs are or whatever I'm feeling. You would have to be intentional as the more aggressive one to be like, how are you feeling today? Okay, how did that make you feel? Or I noticed that something's off. You would have to maybe ask questions to maybe pull things out of me if I'm more of a passive communicator. So in knowing both, I feel like that's how we can kind of bridge that gap in the disconnect that often happens with communication. Because as we know, we asked several couples, like, what are the issues they have in marriage? And communication came up multiple times. And so if this is an issue, then let's get back to the foundation of like, okay, what is your communication style?
Mm-hmm.
And my question to you would be, how do we even develop it? Our communication style, like where does that come from? How do we learn the different styles? Passive aggressive, assertive. How do we learn these different communication styles?
That's a great question. I think it's multifaceted.
Okay.
I think you're born with a certain temperament. I think you have a natural way that you are in relation to other people.
Okay.
But I also think it's shaped by our environment as well. I think we learn a lot from our parents, our families, and really it is how we learn to get our needs met.
Mm-hmm.
When we have a need or a desire, especially as kids, we learn what works. And so if we're, for example, let's just take our son. Our son, he's gone through periods of like, okay, like he knows he can get our attention, even if we're super busy, by yelling sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And so he knows that when he yells, he'll get our attention, even if it is negative attention, because what he really wants is our attention with him. He wants
Right.
our connection. He wants our love. And if we're not providing that for him, then he'll do what he needs to do to get that need fulfilled. And so as we grow older, we learn different ways to have those needs met. And sometimes they're shaped by how we respond. We even learn it when we don't get our needs met. So, for example, I know a person who, when they were in high school, they were teased a lot. And so when they would speak up about a situation that was going on, or they tried to confront it, because it wasn't the right culture for it, because the culture basically promoted like ain't no whining, like ain't no crying, you know what I'm saying? Like, suck it up.
Yeah.
Like, they had to suppress all of that. And so there was this passive aggressiveness that they learned.
That makes sense.
So it really just depends on the environment. However you find to get your needs met, like whatever ways you find, like, then you'll continue to do that over and over and over. And I think that's how we learn to create these styles, because it's not just something that you can just say, oh, I'm going to be assertive, and it just happens.
Right.
Because when you're not stressed, you can try these different styles, but how you can really identify your primary style is when you are stressed. Like when you feel your heart racing, or you feel anxious, you feel some type of way, and you're out of your window of tolerance, then you will respond in a specific way.
So basically, are you saying that there's not one communication style? Like, someone can have multiple ways of communicating?
In a sense, when you're in your window of tolerance, which is basically like your capacity to, it's like this window that you're in to where you're able to problem solve, you're able to think. When you're able to do that, you can practice these different styles, but I think everybody has a primary way to communicate. And I think,
Closer.
girl, you just trying to touch on me.
Come
You're a
closer.
little nasty. So. Girl, we on air. But anyways, so when we have a primary way of communicating. Girl, you got me all distracted.
I'm sorry. I know I
Yeah,
have that
you-
effect on you.
Girl, you touching my leg. What you want me to think? And then when you give me the little,
I want you to think of what I'm trying to communicate.
I mean, you weren't saying nothing with your words. That was very, very passive. Very passive. How you? I'm distracted now. You grab my leg and you give me the 1-2 squeeze.
Oh, that
When
was
you
like,
do that-
honey, I'm trying to tell you something.
Yeah, you telling me something that we can't take care of on air.
Okay. As we
In
were
other
saying.
ways, yeah. So anyways, when it comes to communication, we all have different styles. I don't know.
No, but basically you were saying when you're out of that window of tolerance, then that's when would you say that that's your core communication style?
Yes, because there's some people who have a tendency that when, I guess you can say, like when the pressure's on, they move towards their partner. They want to get their needs met, and then you have some people who might just kind of like withdraw, kind of just sit back and just kind of let things be.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that they're not bothered. It doesn't mean that the person who is aggressive isn't scared per se, or feels, some type of way in those moments. It just means that they naturally are going to operate a specific type of way. They're going to communicate when they are, when they feel their buttons are pressed and they feel, for example, if somebody feels disrespected, some people might get upset and bark back. I don't even know how else to say that.
Bark? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So they'll, here, let's just take this. If I say, Lena, I'm coming over your house today at 5, what you cooking? How would you respond?
I would tell them what. It depends on who the person was. If I'm being honest, it depends on who it was that was asking the question. Because when you ain't asking, you kind of like telling, and that's kind of like more of demanding. You ain't asking, so I might be passive aggressive in that moment, and be like, "This is what I'm cooking and what we'll be having," or I would just actually be assertive.
So okay, so let's just take this. So the question is, Lena, I'm coming over at 5. What you cooking? Because I'm hungry.
Okay.
So that's
I'm cooking chicken.
No. So the line is drawn. Like I said, I'm coming over. Mm-hmm. The line is, you can come over, or I'm going to allow you to come over, or I'm not going to allow you to come over.
Okay.
Like, for example, let's just say if I said, Lena, I'm going to come over at 5. What you cooking? If you don't want me to come over, now you have a decision to make.
Yeah.
If you don't want me to come over and I still come over, and then you don't feel like cooking and you still cook, then that would be passive.
Yeah, that's passive.
You know what I'm saying? It would be passive aggressive if I came over your house and you throwing shade, you giving subliminals, or you basically saying like in your response in your text, like, yeah, you can come over, but I don't know what we're gonna eat. It's I don't want you to come over, but I'm still going to allow it.
Okay.
And assertive would say, no, you're not coming over. I don't feel like having company. Mm-hmm. Like aggressive in that sense, the person who's trying to come over your house would say, I'm gonna come over either way. Like it don't matter.
I'm on my way.
Yeah. Like,
yeah.
So you can see just how that can kind of play out.
Yeah.
And I think
That's
you bring up a good point when you say like, it depends on who you're talking to.
Yeah.
Because when you communicate with different people, a different part of you might show up. Like if you'll communicate with your boss probably in a different way than you would your kids.
Yeah.
You would communicate with your parents in a different way than you would your sister. And depending on who that is, especially if you're not, I'm not going to say not mature, but when you are confident enough, safe enough, and you, I think, love yourself enough, even when it's somebody who is an authoritative figure in your life or an authority figure in your life, you can still maintain that primary style. Well, let me just ask you this before I continue on my rant, because I really was about to keep going. So as we're talking about communication styles, do you think that a person can have more than one style?
I think so. And here's why. I do believe that there's a primary, right? So there's a primary style, but like you said, when you're out of that window of tolerance, like you may be someone that's, let's just say, assertive on any given day when you're just having a conversation with certain people, but let's say you're arguing with your spouse. I don't know if that would be more so assertive, or if it could bring out, especially if you're triggered by something. If it's triggered something in you, then now you can get either passive aggressive, or you can get like, you didn't tap into an aggressive side of me. And the reason why I believe this is because I don't consider myself to be an aggressive person. But there was a moment where I was parenting our son, and I was like, whoa. You know, I reacted in a way, like I didn't even think about it. I reacted, and it was in a way that was aggressive. And it was like, okay, where did that come from? And it let me know that even though I am trying my best to like break patterns generationally, do things different with, you know, our children, there's still something in the core of who I am based on the environment I grew up in and all of that. So it brought out a different side. I consider myself to be more assertive. Like I can express how I'm feeling. I have no problems with that. We have open communication. But in that moment, I reacted in a way that was not within my character.
Right.
And so I feel like how you were talking about that window of tolerance is so important to be aware of that, because that is, in those moments, what's really in you comes out.
Okay, so that's a great question. How do you become aware of that? Because there's some people who are hearing you, they're saying like, man, like I can relate to that. Like I snap on my children sometimes too. I snap on my spouse. Like I treat them like they were a kid, or my in-laws, like they're so pushy, like they're so in our business. And I just don't know how I don't know where to start. And what I'm hearing you say is the place to start is self-awareness.
Yeah.
So how did you personally develop that self-awareness?
Oh, that's hard. I think it just came with time, but I am a person that self-reflects a lot. So I think what has helped me is don't be quick to react and to consider everything that's involved in that moment. So for instance, I have been doing my best to not yell. Since having our daughter, I noticed that she like imitates and repeats everything that I say. And I hear her like, no, Jaden, to her brother. And I'm like, oh my gosh, she hears that because that's the tone of voice that I use. And I don't want her to learn that.
Yeah.
So then how do I show her a different pattern? And the only way to do that is now I'm aware because I heard it. I'm aware. And in that moment, I'm now like keeping my tone leveled instead of yelling in certain moments so that she can see something different. Or in our marriage, I got an example. So
Uh-oh.
no, this is a good one. So we were doing a podcast. It was about the 4 horsemen, but one of them was stonewalling. And while we're on air recording live, you say that when you come home, sometimes you stonewall. And I'm like, okay, you probably could see it. If you go back and watch that episode, you could probably see it on my face that I was like, what do you mean you stonewall me? Because basically what you're saying is when you come home at the end of the day and I'm talking to you, like sometimes you don't have the emotional capacity to receive what I'm saying. And when I'm just unloading, it's too much. So you just kind of zone out, tune out. And in that moment, I was just like, okay. So I didn't bring it up that night to you. I thought about it for a few days. I actually prayed about it. And that's something that I do often is I take time. So I think allowing that space and time instead of feeling like you have to address things right away, because it could have came off passive aggressive when we got in the car. Like, so you stonewall, so you don't listen when I talk to you? Like, or aggressive. It could have came off that way. But what I did is I took time to pray about it. I self-reflect. I wanted to make sure that I wasn't being led by my emotions, that something in me wasn't triggered by what you said, and like that I heard you correctly. And so I just asked you. It was like maybe 2 days. It was still bothering me. So I'm like, okay, this needs to be addressed. I prayed about it. I made sure. I self-reflected, thought about it. And so when I asked you about it, I think we were coming from the kids' swimming classes, and I asked you like, you know how you said you stonewall when I talked to you? What did you mean by that? And then you begin to elaborate on what you meant. And I was like, I feel like that's not your character. It's not reflective of you. You're not one that stonewalls, but you were explaining to me there's moments of stonewalling because you're coming home from a long day and you've had so much that you've dealt with in therapy with clients and so forth that when you have no more mental capacity left to give when you get home. And although it was a conversation that we had, I think you told me, thank you for asking. Because I was like, thank you for clarifying that, because that wasn't the way that I received it. And I just wanted to be sure we were on the same page. But what it allowed me to do after that is like, okay, I'm just used to you coming home. You've had a long day. I've had a long day. There's so much I want to tell you. I'm so excited to tell you. Let me communicate all this to you. To now I'm aware of it. And so I'm able to say, honey, how was your day today? Like, where are you mentally? How are you doing mentally or emotionally? Was it emotionally draining day today? So now, because you mentioned that stonewalling, but we had the conversation about it, I'm now able to be aware when you come home, don't just flood you with a bunch of information, right? Like, see where you are and do a temperature check. And so it allowed an opportunity for us to grow in that communication and knowing like, okay, because even though it came out live on air, if I wouldn't have addressed it, then we couldn't have grown from that. And I believe it was an opportunity to now it's like, okay, this is how we communicate and what needs to be said and not said and how to address the day. So I think just taking time, sometimes you just need time. Don't be so quick to react, because when you react, I feel like that's what's in you in the core of who you are comes out in those moments when you're under pressure, when you're exhausted, when you're tired, when you're anxious, that's what comes out. But if you take time to self-reflect, to think about it, okay, even to ask questions when the time is right, if it's still bothering you. I feel like sometimes there's been things that I pray about and like I didn't even have to address or talk to you about it because the issue was me, not you, to begin with. And I was offended by something or I was hurt by something. It's like, you know him. That's not really, So I feel like allowing that time to, ask yourself the questions like, okay, is this my emotions in the driver's seat?
Yeah.
How do I really feel about this?
Yeah. So I'm actually hearing you say several things. Even just going back to your original response, you were like, you don't know how, like, where to start or have an answer for, like, how do you be self-aware?
Yeah.
And I think you pointed out actually several things that you do that I think could be helpful for other people.
I'm going to break it down because I said a lot.
Yeah, you did. But one of the things you mentioned is, like, you're aware that something's bothering you.
Yeah.
And it's bothering you because it's something that's probably not sitting right within your spirit. So when you have that, like, awareness of, like, man, like, this really don't feel right, and you taking the time to not like react to me because I said something that didn't sit right, and you were just, like, sitting with it. I think that was an indicator to, like, okay, the first step with being aware is, does this bother me? Okay, it bothers me. Why does this bother me?
Yeah, ask the question.
And so you're sitting with whatever it is that's uncomfortable, and you're asking yourself questions, and you're like, okay, well, why is this bothering me? Okay, this is what he said. Okay, this is how I feel. Well, instead of assuming, I'm going to go and ask him, what did he mean by that? Because rightfully so, like, asking me about stonewalling and, you wanting to share with me everything that happened in your day because you're excited or you're overwhelmed or you just want to share with me, you just need to talk to me. Like, all of those are, like, good reasons, but, like, you asking me, like, okay, honey, like, how are you doing? Where are you at? Like, what can you hold? How much information can I share with you that will stick and not just go in one ear and out the other, because you've heard so many people, like, just unload all of their hurt, pain, emotional distress on you all day. Like, what can you handle? Yeah. So in order to be able to do that, you have to say, okay, well, what bothers me? This bothers me. This is what I feel. Okay, let me talk to him to clarify. Right. And then I also think another part of being self-aware is realizing, like, who you are and or who you want to be in specific moments. So for example, just with your kids, you realize, like, you don't want your daughter to be that way, or you don't want your daughter to see you in that way, or you don't want your daughter to treat her brother like that, right. Which means that she's looking at you for her behavior, right. And you don't want that to be how she sees you. And so because you are aware of, like, this is who I want to be, this is what I want her to see, now you're able to say, okay, like, God, like, I don't know, this didn't sit right because I seen that show up in my daughter, and I don't like how that affected her. I don't like how that affected me. And I can't say it's her because she's new to this earth, so I've been here, so she got that from me. So yeah. This is how I want to be. I need you to help me be that. Yeah. Because sometimes I think when it comes to, like, when we see these terrible things about ourselves, there's this quickness to guilt, or, we will project that onto other people. And sometimes we think it's other people's issues or other people's issue, when in reality it is ours. Yeah. But if we don't take that time, then we won't be able to identify, hey, this is our stuff, or this is my stuff, like, I need to change it. But even knowing that I'm not a perfect person, how can I give myself grace and self-compassion to say I'm not perfect, but this is not what I want to be, and this is how we're going to change it. Yeah. So the process of it is really difficult because you just want it to be fixed, and you expect, like, since you're aware of it, it's never supposed to go bad like this again. And so with understanding that you're not perfect, understanding that it's a journey, understanding that you're going to fall short, understanding that you're going to miss the mark, you can give yourself grace, because oftentimes we tend to treat people or interact with people in ways which we see ourselves.
Yeah.
And so if we're hard on ourselves, we're going to be hard on other people.
Yeah.
If we hate ourselves, we're going to display hate towards other people, or we're going to see other people in a hateful way. Because the loudest voice that I don't care if it was your mom, your dad, your uncle, how your family interacted, what happened to you in high school. Like, the loudest voice that's going to replay in your mind is yours. Although, like, you got that way of talking from other people, you're still talking to yourself in that way. And so being aware is the first step of identifying your communication pattern if it's something you want to change.
Yeah. And I think that's a good point, is that it can change. Like, if you're somebody that's passive and you want to be more assertive and communicate in a healthy way and being able to express your needs, because if you're passive, you're always prioritizing someone else. So if you want to be able to come out of that, then, it takes self-awareness. If you're aware of your communication style, okay, but I'm passive, but I want to be more assertive, then that's an opportunity for you to grow. And I think that was a great point that you made, because yes, I have this vision of the mom that I want to be, of the wife that I want to be, and then I show up as that every day. And in the moments where I fall short, there's grace for that, but I get back up. Like, it's not a moment where it's like, okay, I failed and I can't do it anymore. Then I'm going to get back up. And the next time that I encounter that, I'm going to respond in the way that I would want to, in terms of who I'm trying to be.
You know what? I think that's a great point. And this is something that I want to emphasize to our listeners. When you think of the way you communicate, if you feel you're more passive, if you feel you are passive aggressive, don't take that as you're defective, that something's wrong with you. Like, why can't I just share my needs? You learned how to speak that way from someone, and you communicate in that way because it's what helps keep your nervous system safe. Like, your body, like, God created you in such a miraculous way that your body naturally knows how to protect itself without you ever having to step in and intervene. What I mean by that is, when you feel overwhelmed, when you feel super anxious, like, your body tries to keep homeostasis. It tries to stay in balance, in peace. Like, it's almost as if, like, your body is protecting, like, your heart. And when you are overwhelmed, your body knows what to do to calm down. And so if you're passive and conflict is very nerve-wracking for you, your body basically puts you in a position to where, okay, like, I need to be passive because this is overwhelming for me. Or if you are somebody who's aggressive, like, you're going to move towards that problem or situation or person because you need to get this resolved, because if it just sits, it's going to make you feel like you're going to be angry, you're going to be hot, and, like, that's going to overwhelm you more than actually talking about it. Don't look at yourself as defective. Look at yourself as actually you've learned to communicate a specific way to stay safe. And that's really what we want you to understand. Like, we want you to see that the way you communicate, the way you interact with your spouse, the way you communicate with your boyfriend or girlfriend is a way that you've learned to communicate so you can stay safe. I had a question for you, honey, even with talking about that. When you think of the way you communicate or spouses communicate, is there, like, a particular pattern that's better than the other?
So I know, in terms of the communication styles that we're talking about, assertive is the healthiest form of communication, because you can set boundaries, express that your wants, needs, and opinions. So I would say that is the healthiest. But I also wanted to add, well, what you just shared, like, whether it's passive or aggressive, right, on opposite ends of what that may look like. It's not like one is bad and one is good. I feel like you can be assertive, and that's an area that's actually a strength to you in the workplace, right? Because you're direct, you're a leader, you can have great qualities there. And then being passive, you're nurturing, you're compassionate. Like, I feel like they both have their goods and their bads, and it's just understanding sometimes your strength can also be a weakness. And that was something that I learned when we did your discernment group, because I had to try to find some areas of weakness for you. And I'm like, I don't know of many. But a strength can also be a weakness. And so I don't want it to be like, oh, this is a good way of communicating or this is a bad way. And understanding we can bridge the gap and just have healthy communication, which is what we are trying to tell you.
Yeah. And regardless of whatever it is, communicating is the way to figure out how do you get your needs met and how you can learn to interact with your spouse in a way that you two can function effectively. Because at the end of the day, it's not necessarily the communication style. It's how you and your partner operate together that makes for healthy or negative, and it's going to look like if everybody in the world was assertive, that would be very boring.
Yeah, it would be.
If everybody was passive, we wouldn't get things done. If everybody was aggressive, there would be a lot of chaos and there would be a lot of friction and problems. But each one of us are wonderfully made in who we are.
Yeah.
And with our particular style, with some work, with some coaching, whatever the case may be.
Self-awareness.
Yeah. Like, you can learn how to have an effective relationship. You can learn how to thrive in your situation.
Yeah.
And I think once we get past comparing ourselves to other people, we look at other relationships and like, man, why can't I be like him or why can't I be like her? Once we get past that and we start to accept ourselves for who we are, then I think at that point we can start to be more effective, because once we accept who we are, there's a confidence that we have in ourselves that says, like, this is who I am. Like, this is the problems I have. I'm aware of that, but those don't define me. This is where I want to grow, and this is where I'm going in order to make that happen. So this is what I bring to the table. Like, I'm not him, I'm not her, and we can learn to make this operate in an effective way for both of us by me just simply being me.
Yeah, I think that's good. And what I would end with is, a lot of times they say that if you want to improve in an area, then you have to do more of it in like practicing that. And as simple as it may be, communication is one of those things. Like, I feel like there's so many communication issues in marriage because they're not communicating. They're not conversing. They're not having the conversations. And so being intentional about setting aside time to communicate, to learn how you can balance that out in terms of the different communication styles, so that you can learn how to effectively make that work for your marriage, because it's going to look different in every marriage with every two people.
Yeah, it will. And I guess just closing with that, with practicing, just get around some people you feel have a healthy communication, like not even a healthy communication style, but just a healthy way of communicating. Like, it is very scary to want to have a conversation, but there is the fear of rejection. And oftentimes that's, especially like with individuals who are passive, there is this fear of being rejected by your partner. There is this fear of not being accepted for who you are. And that really guides a lot of people to not address certain things. But getting around people or asking people questions to help you be able to communicate more effectively your needs, I think that's a great way to start just addressing some of the things that you want to change in your communication. Because regardless of your situation, the number one task for romantic relationships is being able to manage differences. You're different, they're different, you come with different things, they come with different things. And if that's the number one task in managing differences, then we need to find ways to communicate in order to get those differences managed. And so, with all that being said, we just want to thank you for joining us. We just pray that this was a blessing to you. We pray that it's been helpful, because we don't want you to see yourself as defective. We don't want you to think of yourself as less than. We don't want you to put yourself in a situation where you're always comparing. once you start to accept yourself for who you are, once you start to accept your partner for who you are, and not trying to make them who you are, you'll start to see so much beautiful bliss within your relationship.
Yes.
And you can start getting to the point where you're not just surviving in your relationship, but you're thriving.
Yes.
As we say always, a thriving marriage is for you. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you again on the next episode of Diving Deep with the Levs.